All right, take it away.
Hi. Okay, so my name is Tim McNamara. I'm just going to be a little bit confused because I want to share a slide, share a tab. But is this going to be how is the best way to work with Google Meet and presenting? I'm sorry actually, what I might do is I will share my entire screen. And that way I can muck around a bit because I want to do some things that are interactive. So I need to click slideshow. First of all, I say first of all. Second of all, after introducing myself and saying hello, thank you everyone for saying hi. In terms of sort of procedure and policy through the talk, feel free to hit the raise hand button or slam the chat, or even unmute yourself if you really need to talk to me. I'm happy to be pretty fluid with the presentation. And right, let's go. So Rust, gotchas, idioms, and I also added and tips because I started writing all of the talk and thought, actually, why be exclusive? There are some interesting things that might be useful for more generally, and so I may as well keep them on the slides. Not everything is designed to be... I'll get to the disclaimer. So I work at a company called TCDI, but this is not a TCDI talk. This is a personal talk that I happen to be giving as a member of the Rust community, basically. And let's go with, so the agenda actually is a little bit old. There are 3 parts of it. I'm going to give this talk in 1 minute, and then we're going to be going through a whole bunch of a grab bag of gotchas and tips and idioms and so forth. And then I want to actually spend a little bit of time exploring some of the resources that I've referenced to generate the talk so that you can do your own research. So the 1 minute version, if you've got nothing else, is to hunt for the Rust patterns repository, the one at the top here. Oh, sorry. And also look through the Clippy index, which is it's actually a real treasure trove of useful guidance. And there are some other official or semi-official projects called the API guidelines, as well as the unsafe code guidelines.
Sorry, where are you posting that? Yeah, you're not sharing your screen right now.
Oh my goodness, this is how embarrassing is that? Oh, well, that's dreadful. So I shall. No wonder everyone's faces were like, "What? What about this?" I got so far. Is that slightly better? You should be seeing 1 minute version in quite large text. Oh, it's coming up. I feel really silly.
There we go.
Beautiful.
So these four resources are what I'm referring to. The slides are already on GitHub. So allow me to, I just added a PR to the Vancouver RS repo. I will add that as a comment in the chat so that people can play along. Here we go. Okay, to start out with, I expect sort of 3 types of people in the audience. One would be a kind of a big group of people probably have never actually used Rust, but they're really here because the Rust community is really exciting. Rust has gained a lot of momentum, and they kind of want to get on the hype train. 2, people who have kind of dabbled around a little bit or using it at home but not at work, I think is probably where the bulk of the people in this meetup group are probably at, and who I hope will have the best experience in this talk. They possibly are confused and frustrated. And I'm hopeful that if you are confused and frustrated about Rust, that this talk will be really beneficial to you. If it's not, and I need to improve it for further iterations, please let me know. By the way, I just emphasize again, it's totally okay to stop me. 3, if you are an experienced Rust programmer and you are super opinionated about particular things, I hope that I'm not going to annoy you or irritate you too much with some of my slander. I will, but I don't think this talk, hopefully you'll get something out of it. Probably not a huge amount because you already know most of it. Now the next question is like, well, who the heck are you? And I'm the author of a programming book on Rust called Rust in Action. It takes people through the process of learning Rust by building things, and in particular, people who have never used a systems programming language. I'm also the co-organizer of Rust Wellington, and I have a social media presence as well. I'd like to give live talks and so forth via YouTube primarily. In a professional setting, I'm I guess you'd call me a specialist in natural language processing, AI, and machine learning also. Cool. Okay. Now we're at part 2. We've done introduction, so that's useful. My first recommendation would be to use Clippy. Like in your code, if you haven't already configured your editor and you're kind of just on the command line, Cargo Clippy will actually improve your code base. I guarantee you. There are hundreds and hundreds of links, and often they are very, very helpfully worded so that you don't feel silly. The next, or kind of the first piece of code that we're going to be working through is about type conversions. And we want to avoid a particular problem. So if I just change some settings here, because I want to, and I want vertical. I want to demonstrate a problem that you may or may not have encountered. So this is a slightly contrived example. I give you that. I've got a -1 by 32. So this would be like a Java int that is -1. And I want to convert it to usize. Now, notice that on the playground, I'm running a debug mode. And I'm running and running and running. And actually what I get out is a kind of like giant integer. And you can thank 2's complement arithmetic for that. Now I want to change the build profile. I'm going to compile the same code under release. And I get the same behavior. And I'm feeling quite silly. But what I would like, because I thought that this changed, but actually, no, maybe this is still a problem. The problem is that actually, if you convert a negative number to usize, which is an unsigned integer type, you get things that are kind of weird. Like this 18 quadrillion, I'm not sure how many significant digits there are in there, isn't exactly what you want. What we would prefer to get is the program crashing. Because if you have a negative number and you convert it into an unsigned type, you want your system to break. And both release and debug mode refused to break. However, with the try into trait, so try into is, we can hunt for it, Rust try into trait, is recently as part of Rust 2021, and it provides the conversion method that returns a result. And if you try to convert something that's impossible to convert, your program will crash. And you may think, well, why would I want my program to crash? And the reason is that crashing is a better way to respond here than proceeding with invalid input, like invalid data. You don't want that 18 quadrillion or however large that was to kind of poison or pollute your program. Right, so that's our first idiom. So the try into trait. Oh, we've got a question.
I just wanted to add that, when you say crash and it's better than mangling input or having invalid data, I wanted to add that it's not necessarily the result. You could use the same pattern, the try into, to properly handle somehow the error instead of just crashing.
That's a very good point. So another alternative is not to crash. An alternative might be to say, for example, if let sum. Actually, it's an OK here, and it's in. And I wonder if this will work. I need type inference. If we have an in, then I print it. Otherwise, my program just proceeds. But at least in this input, in this case, we've been very explicit about what our intent is. If you're not familiar with this if-let pattern, it's actually one of the idioms that I would like to demonstrate. It's a shorthand, and I'll kind of give you a bonus one. It's a shorthand of matching. So I'll just repeat it. I'll comment out the bottom one. We'll just check if this runs, because I'm not sure if this is valid code. I don't think that you can have a type hint here. I need to indicate which type I'm trying to convert into, and I don't know if I can do that. Okay, cannot infer type. Now,
You could save it into a variable and then if let on that.
Yeah, right. That's exactly what we can do. So we could say, we'll just say, might be an in, might not be. And we'll say that this, what we really want is, so this will convert into a result of usize, and we don't care about the error type. So we'll use an underscore as like a placeholder type. And then we get nothing as output, because actually we actually received the error type. So this if block or this expression return false. Okay, cool. Right, so that's our first idiom. In fact, we snuck in a second one there. Another one we want to talk about is single.
There's a question in the chat.
Oh, excuse me. Right. Can't we use turbofish? Actually, I thought so too, very recently. In fact, when I was checking this morning, but I had encountered a problem. So in the chat, we have this question, can't use hyperfish. And if you are a new Rust person, I'll have to explain this jargon. So actually, I'll first explain, no, we'll first try it. And if it does work, that's okay. Oh, this is invalid. That's not legal Rust. What we're doing here is we're trying to perform the conversion, and we're adding a type parameter. But try into, in some ways quite strangely, takes 0 generic arguments. And so therefore, this thing, turbofish, which you have to squint very, very hard to think of it as a fish. But this double colon, square brackets, and then some type in here appears in a few places. And if I am allowed to, I'll show you one place in which it can appear. And what we can try and do is we've got a parse method. So we can actually, we've got a string, or in fact, in this case, a string slice, and we want to parse that into an integer. So in this case, we will convert it into I32. It's fun, let's say. Now this will return a result, and that will fail. So that will pass. return OK. And we'll also accept a negative number as well. So this is syntax for take the string as input parse, but as well as taking, in some sense, arguments from the left, -1, I also want to insert or kind of inject a type parameter on the right. This is kind of a slightly awkward way to provide an argument, but that's what we've got. Now, I said from the left, but actually parse is just another function which happens to take an implicit argument to self because it's a method call. If you're not familiar with how types, which types can call which methods, in Rust, we have this terminology that we call, we don't inherit from base classes, we implement traits. And so the parse method actually comes from format, I think it's string from string or from stir. I think that's the trait. And so each trait provides a set of methods. And it turns out that it's hidden inside every single Rust program is a use standard prelude and then a star. So the from stir trait, which I'll find in the standard documentation, is automatically included via the prelude, which is injected into every Rust program. That's why I didn't need to explicitly include it. I'm sorry if I'm just going off track. I'm more than happy. I can I can stick to the script if you'd like. Here is some more. How about I provide the trait documentation for what I've just talked about? Okay, cool. Right. I really wanted to talk about building a single executable binary. So I find this is really cool. That's because I spend a lot of time in Kubernetes and I don't like it. One of the things that makes me hate Kubernetes less is having containers that are really small and really simple to deploy. And the way to build your binary as a single executable is kind of like with this magic syntax here. So allow me to kind of clarify it. So we start with this cargo run, which is quite familiar. By the way, this is the bash shell. So if you're in a Mac OS or a Linux environment, it probably should look familiar. Now, for production, we want to compile under release mode, which enables optimizations and strips out superfluous debugging information. I need to include a target parameter, which says that I want to convert this to Linux, and I want to rely on this thing called muscle. And muscle is a libc, or that is implemented in a way that can be statically compiled. If all of this jargon is just kind of flying over your head, I apologize. But we need something else, which is we need to actually send a feature flag through to the compiler called the C runtime -static. And this is this is an awkward way to do it, but what you end up with is a single executable that you can SCP or async into any Linux system, and it will run. It can, which is actually quite cool. I'm just going to pause to check on more questions. No, good.
It will run as opposed to what will happen if you try to do the same without any build.
Right. Okay, cool. So that's a really interesting question. And again, I don't. So let's ask the. So where do we find that? How do we teach ourselves? We start with Google, right? And there are questions like, oh gosh, I don't know what all this means. The place to look, I think, is the Rust reference is a very good guide. it provides us with a very, it's an authoritative reference for the entire language. Rust will compile a static build, but it will probably use glibc, and if this, which isn't static, which is dynamically linked. So if I go to linkage again, so it will rely on maybe someone, if you've ever been to me, this isn't as nice. Right. Okay. So so there's, I wonder if it's, I wonder if I can see. There's a target about conditional compilation in from Rust, and yes, you can target Rust. Sorry, can target other operating systems from a host. So we can ask Rust to build Linux binaries inside our Mac laptop. But one of the problems that we'll face if we are on, even if we ask for a static build, we still will have some, we'll still include glibc by default. So we require this C static, the runtime. Now, I'm actually going to go back to my, if I need to flesh this out, I think I'll expand at the end of the talk, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great. Okay, so the, one thing that has confused me a lot, I say this because I'm a relatively simple person, is like, what is the difference between like default versus new? So up here on line 3, I've got a point structure. It has an X and a Y field. They're both 32-bit values. I have a static method which returns point. It initializes at the origin. So if you're into Cartesian geometry, you'll know what that term refers to. I'm at 0, 0. Now, when I want to print it out, I have this print line thing, and I print out the X variable on the left and the Y variable on the right. So this is all fine. Now, another way to initialize, well, we talked about types earlier. And one thing that Clippy will actually ask you to do is implement default. Now, you may ask, why would you implement default? Because you actually get no other behavior out of it from this instant, like from this. Now, I am going to refer back to this from stir thing. Now, I want to be able to enable my, oh, I got to get to the right playground. I want to enable my point to be parsed. So I will use stirred stir from stir. And I'm just going to copy in the code that's been provided in here. But I'm going to need to change a thing, which is parse. I need F32, and then I need F32. What this will enable me to do, I've just opted into, I'm going to change this to just unit, I think. So I need to provide an error type, which is just the unit type. And now I should be able to actually start with a string and then convert that into a point. The default thing will come back into, like, it will become a thing shortly. So let me change this. Let's say I want to parse it. So parse again. And then I need to add turbofish. In fact, I don't. I could also include the type hint on the left. This is another way of doing it. And this now becomes, actually this stays the same. So I add left and right. What we have here is, a whole bunch of syntax errors. Okay, so I don't have the semicolon. Oh, saving doesn't help in the playground. And now I've got more problems. Okay. Probably, which is all related to float error is not. Okay, so I need to actually pull more out of the documentation. Sorry about this. I shall just change it to string. Oh, no, I won't. Oh, gosh, what do I do? I could actually just implement. Oh, no. What about... I hunt for... Has float error. Yeah, I can actually just import that. What we're doing now is we are kind of opting in to being able to convert our type from a string. And hopefully, okay. I'll say this is a result, right? Okay. I'm just going to unwrap here because I know that it will work. And then I'll get back to why I might need the default. If I've implemented a default, I actually get a whole bunch of extra stuff for free. So one of the methods that I get access to is unwrap or default. And I'm going to change the default implementation. Instead of just calling new with no argument, and let's say I provide garbage. I can actually get my point out, and it will initialize to 0, 0. So you can start with new, and then you're able to opt into default pretty quickly with a very short method that just calls the new static method. And then you get a bunch of functionality that relies on the default trait. Effectively, you just provide. So that's the difference between the default or new. You get a bunch of other things as well, but this is kind of. Oh, yes.
What seems to be missing for me here is a good reason to use new now that default pretty much replaced it.
Yeah, so this is a tricky question. I actually, I wonder this myself. It's a convention. It's shorter. That's basically the only thing that would prevent you from doing it. There's nothing inside the Rust language that requires new methods. It's only a community convention, and so there's no requirement to use default. Nothing. It's not defined in any traits, and so it's only there as a convenience to other programmers.
Also, mind if I quickly add something?
Absolutely, please do.
Yeah, so I think that there's kind of at least one case where you want to use new, because new you can think of as your constructor. And in the case of the point, like you may want to be like new x and y, and that's my point. Otherwise, the default will be, say, 0, 0. And there's also some other, say, structs where it actually doesn't make sense to give a default value. Say, for example, like a file pointer. Like you need a valid value. It doesn't make sense for there to be a default value.
Right. So in that case, you can't implement default. There is no valid default. So new is kind of your only option. No, thanks for that. That's really useful.
Also, I found useful is when the new method, when creating something new, actually requires taking arguments, then that can only be achieved with new.
Right. Yes. Yeah. There is a literal form of constructors which enables you to just add modify the fields that you want and then sort of add ... default. But that's what you're saying is also correct. That often we provide other constructors when it is convenient to do so. This one is quicker. this one I won't go off track on. I have my friend here, the point again. Now this time I've derived debug because I want to be able to print out message, and that is I want to report out the position. So the message current. So at the moment I've got an unused variable warning, and the output is down at the bottom here on the right. It says that we're at position 0, 0. Now, one of the things that I want to do is demonstrate that there are several ways to construct actually, I'll just do the good way. If you want to create a string that concatenates other strings, I'm just going to rename some variables. Sorry about this. Boilerplate, let's say, and then I want to create a message, and that's going to be a string. I could, I'll just add macro that you want is format, and it looks exactly the same as print line because they're all built with the same internal machinery. And I've got position here, a boilerplate. And then perhaps a difference between format and, what format returns and what printline expects is that you require an ampersand at the beginning because printline wants to borrow the argument. And in this case, we'll also need a space. So you could think of this as a more efficient way to do one alternative, which is to create a temporary string and expand it over time. So one question would be, how does one do that? We'd start by creating a message, and it would be a string, and we'd say new, and we'd need to mark it as mutable. We've got our position, and now we want to report it. So we say position push _ stir. And then we'd also need to push a character, which is kind of like the delimiter. I probably misspelled that. Postician. Kind of awkward typing and speaking at the same time. Hopefully he'll forgive me. We push a character, and then we also need to somehow provide... Oh, no. It's the message that I want to push to. And then somehow I need to push position. Well, heck, how do I do that? And then the question is, yes, how does one do this? And this will fail because position doesn't get appended to strings. So let's try something else. We've got toString, I think. The reason why we have a toString method is because everything that implements display by design also implements toString. They're kind of a follow-on type. oh, sorry, it's a subtype that's implemented for every type a subtrait that is implemented for every type that implements the parent trait, and the parent trait happens to be display. Okay, so in one alternative is to create a temporary buffer and then expand the buffer. But a more convenient way would be to just use format, and that's what my recommendation to you is. Okay, cool. Okay, so the next tip is going to be the most complex Rust, I think, that you'll see in the talk. Although we have actually seen quite a lot of complex Rust already, but that's because we didn't stick to exactly what I wanted to do. But hopefully you've got a lot out of it. So here's the name of the game. I want to implement a function that can take multiple types. And I want to do that in the most efficient way. Now you may say, oh, well, you just use generics. That's what you've got. That's the tool in your toolbox. It turns out that Rust actually has several tools in its toolbox. And report status actually isn't implemented yet. So you may start with something like this. Pretty much every single piece of example Rust code that deals with text will accept an ampersand stir, where it's called a string slice. But then we have these problems with type errors, and we've given recommendations. Why don't you borrow? And so we can actually go and do so. Borrowing is quite a good idea. Anyway, it turns out that when you have a reference to some type, Rust also has this kind of magic deref behavior. So one of the gotchas in Rust is that pointers, or I say references to types, can dereference to other types. So if I go back to, this is kind of like a very weird gotcha if you are new to Rust and you have used a systems programming language before. If you haven't, it probably passes you by. But allow me to explain, allow me to demonstrate this slightly more concretely. T has target U, which is kind of a it's a hidden form of polymorphism, and it's called deref coercion, and it means that one type can masquerade as other types. Any pointer to something else can become some other type, and it enables a reference to string or a reference in this case to a cow object to pretend that it's a reference to a string slice or in reference to a stir. So actually, a good place to start is just how the example code is written, ampersand stir. You'll find that and then borrow the text types later. But we can actually be a little bit fancier than this. Actually, this is kind of a step backwards. If you accept a string, you're going to get yourself into real trouble because you are actually taking ownership of an owned type, which means that in order for someone to make use of this version they will need to allocate on the heap. They'll need to make a memory allocation of the text that they want to be printed out, and that will be need to send ownership will need to move into this function. And so I would avoid this version. There's kind of an intermediate, which is you could take a reference to string. This won't necessarily force you to require, we're borrowing now instead of taking ownership. But if you started with a string slice, you're still going to need to create an owned form, which means that you're going to need to allocate memory. So again, I want to skip over this ampersand form for now. If you happen to know that your code will only have strings, then maybe this is fine. Again, here's another case where we have this kind of cow thing. So a cow is an enum in the same way that a result is. But it can be either a string or a str, depending on its context. It's called a copy on write is what it stands for. That's what so this is actually an initialism, and it will turn into a string if a string is required. So one way, by the way, one way to deal with functions that look like they need an owned type to actually pass in a cow, and we'll see. But again, this is kind of something I wish to avoid right now because they've got some really cool stuff later. Let's say that you do want to opt into generics. I can ask for any type that implements display. And then Rust will create 3 versions of report status. And each type, so we have 3 types down the bottom. Oh, actually, no, we have a couple of here. I need to also include the type so I need to add a use statement. So use std format display. Rust will create a new version of each of these, except that I've got a problem with cal be declare. Okay, so it turns out that cal requires an internal a type parameter as well. So I could create it like this, but I don't really want to. So I'm going to also use the from method, which will kind of convert from the original type. And can kind of figure out the types itself. But the upshot of this is you triple the size of your binary for this particular function. That means, or if you had some more, it's trivial here, but if you had something that was more complex, you'll find that using a lot of generic code will increase the size of your binaries. Potentially, if you have very, very hot code, will also, such as numerical calculations, will also break cache coherence as well, because your functions calls will be dispatched to different parts of the memory address space. Okay. But we don't necessarily need to worry about display. Not all types implement display. You can do other tricks. So we can say that T could be any type which can be converted into a string. Or I wonder if I could do into a string slice. I wonder if that would work. No. Oh, it needs this lifetime annotation. So I'll just say $A. And let's see if I can figure this out quickly. I just add a lifetime bound here. Let's see if this magically works. Okay, no, we still get things broken. So I'm going to cancel. Thanks everyone for staying up after 7 o'clock. If you've got to get dinner ready or anything, I totally accept that you may wish to go. When we're almost done. Now we have some issues, and that's because this one needs to take ownership. It's like such a, I bet I'm getting rate limited now because I've applied, like I've tried to compile so much code so quickly. I'm probably being throttled by the server, which is useful. Cool. Okay, well, I think we may...
Perhaps we can list the various different options.
Yeah. Sure. So here are some things that are a little bit more magical. And one of the ways that I want to this looks a bit crazy. So do you remember how I mentioned that Rust will create 3 versions of your code? We can actually avoid a lot of that by creating an inner function that only has a specific type and have kind of an outer public interface that is generic, and only the conversion function will be triplicated. Now I've got a timeout, which is fine. I mean, I already knew, but I encourage you to play along with some of the examples. The links to all of these are actually in the README of my talk in the GitHub repository, so you can play along as well. For this last one, this one's a bit crazier. You may have heard that Rust is a static language, and maybe you're right, but you can actually include some kind of type dynamic. You can actually create a trait object on internally. So you can have different parts of an if statement returning different types. So the nothing to report, this is type string slice. And this one here is the line 50 is actually returning a string. Those are the concrete types. But what we're doing up here on line 47 is asking R to be assigned as a trait object to something that implements display. If this seems kind of nuts, I'm sorry. It was the most contrived, well, it was, but I want to just illustrate that there are ways in kind of advanced Rust to get around some of the constraints that are applied by its type system, or like its very narrow definition of what is valid. And in particular, you can have a conditional expression returning multiple types if you understand the way that the trait system works. My view is that the trait system is kind of the center of Rust. I've got another talk which might be useful if you care about that. Okay, cool. We've talked about this one. That's the end of what I wanted to talk about in detail. We have gained a little bit of time, but we're still over an hour. But I just wanted to highlight some of the references that I talked about before, and then I'll open things up to questions. The first is a website called the Rust Design Patterns, and this provides a very thorough and a very consolidated view of idiomatic Rust. And in fact, one of the thing that I talked about right at the end is explained as on-stack dynamic dispatch. And you're very welcome to explore this particular pattern in depth. And there are many, many others. So one thing that I think is really quite, it's kind of a bit of a crazy idea, is the fact that all collections are smart pointers. If you don't care about this, sorry. But almost all collections are implemented as what they call a smart pointer, which is a reference, and then either a size or some sort of tag. And that's quite neat because they're small and easy to pass around. I mentioned Clippy before, and that my strong recommendation right at the start was to apply Clippy to your code. Now, if you want to stop writing, let's say, C# in Rust, and you're concerned that you are writing unidiomatic code, one of the things that you can do is go in here and look at the style, or basically the warning level, the lint level of warning. So things that aren't critical, but are just not idiomatic. And so in this example, we have, and hopefully I'll just try and increase those font size a little bit. We have the Rust way, let's say, is to use the method as null. And you'll just find that there are lots and lots of little hints about how to create smaller, more idiomatic code. Now, whether or not this sum OK pattern is easy or difficult for you probably depends on your familiarity with the rest of the language. And I recommend taking it slow if you don't understand the rationale as to why these are recommended. If you have code that looks a lot like the top and you understand it, and you don't necessarily understand what follows underneath, then stick with the code at the top, because ultimately it's you that is more important than the compiler. The compiler is happy with either. And it's more important that you have a good understanding of your own system. And you want, and as you learn, you can always refactor and change things. Okay. Two more. One is a book called the API Guidelines. Now, the API Guidelines are another official, sort of a semi-official book that fleshes out, provides a set of very, very smart recommendations for people who are writing library crates. So you'll remember about the start of the book, I had a recommendation for people who are writing binaries, applications in Rust, or console applications. And this one is a this provides another set of I guess idiomatic or idiomatic and performant Rust code. And last one is for people that are doing, I let the cat out of the bag just then. There was Ferris. The last one is for people who are dealing with unsafe. So if you have to interface with other languages, or you really want to understand how Rust is under the hood, that is how it's implemented. For example, like what is a trait? What is a trait object? Like what does that actually mean? It turns out that a trait object is a pointer to some data and a pointer to a vtable. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, there are quite a few references on explaining what a vtable is. But for people that care, this is a very, very handy reference. And now we're at the end. So yay, congratulations, everyone. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions. And here are some contact details. I will stop presenting, I believe. Actually, no, I'll wait for questions. And people can jot down my details if they need it. It's that thing where no one wants to answer the first question. Everyone's exhausted. It's the middle of the week. Everyone's hungry. Thanks very much for coming in after work. I apologize. Oh, I appreciate it.
No,
sorry.
We know you've been having a pretty busy time since you have a newborn, right?
Yeah, she's 7 weeks old. I was up at 3. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. I nearly cancelled on you guys, and it's like I can't do that. I just said yes. So I apologize for being. Hopefully this was well. I kind of pulled this together last night, so I hope it was mostly coherent.
It was good. Yeah, I definitely learned a lot of interesting facts about Rust, and I definitely will take a look at the resources that you posted. So.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, thank you very much, and congratulations.
No, my pleasure. Okay, cool. Well, happy to sit and lurk if because it sounded like there was a really interesting discussion around Rust, Python, and data science and so forth. But I'll probably drop out in about 15 minutes if the So I'm happy to just sit back.
Yeah, that's fine. You can lurk if you like. Our meetups are only scheduled for an hour and a half, and usually we use this time for various other announcements and our news segment But anyway, I'm just going to quickly go over my list of things I need to talk about. Oh, right. So for those who are wondering, Tim was able to make it out here today because of our partnership with Manning Publications. So as you know, I think he has written a book. Is it Rust in Action, or I can't remember now. I'm really tired myself.
No, it's absolutely fine. Here, I'll plug my own book, shall I? It is Rust in Action. There's a link in the chat.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so yeah, we have a partnership with Manning Publications, and that's why we have had all these awesome, amazing talks from people like Carol Nichols and now Tim. So yeah, so that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. Related to that is also this live video prize draw form. So I'm gonna repost that for people who may have come late. But if you want, you can enter into this prize draw for a live video on Manning Publications website. So if you don't know what a live video is, it's sort of like a set of online lectures in video format, I believe. I believe this one is to accompany your book, if I'm not mistaken.
They're kind of friends, so they came out at about the same time. I assume this one is Rust in Motion, which is Carol and Jake's video. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
I actually paid for these. Yeah, the downside of being an author is that you don't actually get the free stuff from everyone else, even though it's really good. So I paid. It's actually a really cool course. If you are relatively new to Rust, you'll really enjoy it.
All right, yeah. So if you want to have a chance at winning this course for free, just enter your name into the Google form there. It's 1 entry per person. The only other thing I want to note is that you need to enter a name that I can actually find on meetup.com, because I know sometimes people like to join this meeting and enter names that are not the same as the one on Meetup, and then I can't find them afterwards, and it's pretty annoying. So yeah, please make it easy for me to actually find you. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm going to give you a bit of time to enter your name if you haven't done so yet. And I'm going to talk about a couple of other things really quickly here, and then we'll close out with the prize draw. So first thing is just a short reminder about our survey. So this is our first survey that we've ever done, asking for feedback on the Vancouver Rust meetups. So I sent out a message to everyone with a link to a form there. It's about 6 questions, 7 if you include the extra comments that you want to add. But it's pretty short, so it's not too much time. Please fill it out if you can. It's completely anonymous, and that'll help us get a better idea of what kinds of things you guys are interested in hearing at these meetups, and it'll help us better understand like which segments and which portions of the meetups you like and don't like, and we'll try and adjust things as we go. No promises that I can change everything to exactly the way that the majority likes it, but we'll do our best. I will be posting a link to that again on the Meetup page itself. So in case you missed that message because maybe you hadn't joined the group yet by that point, then yeah, you'll have another chance to take a look at it and submit. But without further ado, let's see, we've got a couple of comments here in the chat. Okay, so that's interesting. Is this about data science in Rust?
I was just apologizing profusely because Rust in Action was actually announced in like 2017, I think July 2017, but I didn't actually get it out into print until the end of end of June last year. So it was a 4-year wait for some people, nearly a 5-year wait for me and my family. But yeah, so apologies if you sat and waited for a long time.
It's not a problem. I mean, we only waited for like, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, I think, because we were just kind of doing our usual round of introductions. But yeah, let's go to our news segment right now, just to give people a little bit more time to submit to the prize draw if they want to. Just share my screen. Open up the good old Pocket over here. Don't look at my emails. And yeah, let's start with some recent news. So again, all the news stories will be posted to the Meetup page for this event. And all the news stories are from things that happened within like the last month. So yeah, let's begin with this one. So Bevy had a new release. So if you're interested in game development in Rust, I know I am. They just had a new release, and there's a ton of improvements. They've made a lot of changes to the API. They have a nice guide on how to migrate. One thing I will say about this is that they did some interesting changes with query sets, and that caused me to have to do a couple of extra clones, so that was a little bit annoying, but yeah, otherwise, I think it's a lot of good changes, and you should definitely check this out if you haven't already and you're interested in game development. So next, we have a couple of things that I picked out. So as a result of Bevy updating, Bevy GGRS has finally published to crates.io. So if you're interested in creating a peer-to-peer kind of networked game and you want to have a very seamless, very lagless kind of experience, then you should definitely check out these rollback netcode libraries. Rollback is kind of all the rage these days. If you've been playing a lot of like online games, especially fighting games, you're probably familiar with this. Otherwise, I'd recommend looking at the many numerous articles about it, because yeah, a lot of people, ever since the pandemic started, have really gotten into the whole rollback thing. So related to that is also Bevy Backroll. So they posted on Reddit that they've come up with a new release for their Bevy plugin for rollback netcode. And this one's a bit different from the other one in that this one is a bit more type safe, or at least according to them, and a little bit more aimed at people who only want to write their applications like purely in Rust, and they don't want to use like another engine like Godot. So yeah, this is another alternative if you don't like the other library. This one is just a little tweet that I saw a little earlier today, but yeah, it looks like Google is hiring for a Google Cloud Rust SDK. So that's pretty interesting. If you want to apply there, you can definitely go and check out the link. And yeah, maybe conflict of interest with our own recruiting here at BitQuill, but I'm just gonna quietly sweep that under the rug. And the last thing I wanted to point out is that, yeah, there's a new version of Rust. Some interesting new features here, like capturing identifiers in format strings. So you can now kind of just do this, where you can use well, this is, I think, old, but the new thing is this one here, where you can just, define a variable somewhere in the scope above your print line, and then you can just use the variable inside of the curly braces. No need to, explicitly say person equals whatever expression. So that's kind of interesting. And here's a more complicated example with a for loop here. Yeah, there's this reduced Windows command search path which should help with avoiding certain things like ripgrep's published security vulnerability, where the behavior wasn't quite as they expected. So this is changed to match Microsoft's own PowerShell documents. And yeah, this is an interesting change. There's more must-use annotations in the standard library, but it doesn't really say much about what has been marked must-use here. So I guess you'd have to check out the proposal here if you want to get a better idea. But yeah, and then there's the usual stabilized APIs. Okay, looks like there was actually nothing here. So yeah, that's it for today's news segment. Thank you all for listening. And yeah, I think with that, let's just go straight into the prize draw. It's this one. So, oh, I'm really good at this. I know what I'm doing today. Okay, so we've got about 2 through 8. All right. Well, so the way I usually do these is I have a playground that just picks a number between 2 and whatever the end of the range is inclusive. So that's 2 through 8, and we're gonna pick a number. It looks like our winner is number 3. So yeah, number 3 is Bjorn. So congratulations, Bjorn. You just won a live video code. So I'll be messaging you after the event to send you the code. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, right. Last thing before we all go here. Call for participation. So we need speakers at our meetup, and currently we're kind of missing a lot right now. We don't really have any speakers lined up for the next several months. So if anyone's interested in coming out and doing a presentation, yeah, just feel free to contact me, and I can try and schedule you in. There are guidelines posted, I believe, on the meetup events themselves for how long the talks should be and what kind of things we expect. But yeah, otherwise, oh, I guess yeah, I'm next month. I also want to cover the results of our survey, and we're probably also going to be doing a group photo because we haven't done an updated group photo with our meetup in quite a long time. So we don't have an updated picture, and I'm still figuring out the details around how that's going to work. But yeah, something to be aware of in case you want to attend. That's probably going to be happening next month. There'll be more details posted soon. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you all for coming. If you have any last-minute questions, feedback, or concerns, now's the time. But otherwise, yeah. No questions? Nothing? All right. Thank you all for coming. Bye.